I'd like to take you into a little bit of the technology. This is the fun part. So you may be interested in this. I don't know. Emmanuel/Eric has the copies. If you want copies, you're welcome to them. I don't. So these were the today's approaches. You know, everybody would create their own file, so everybody'd have all kinds of different files. You know, some would be real time, some wouldn't. Some, you know. And in many cases, they would say, well, we can't ingest all this data. Okay, so throw all that away and we'll take in this. We won't even look at it, just throw it away. So and RDBMS, relational databasing schemes, the problem with relational databasing schemes when you're dealing at the terabyte per minute rates or fiber optic rates is it's hard to index and keep up with the rate coming in. It starts to back up and fall apart. So we went with absolute flat files. The whole way, the best way we saw to do it was B+ tree indexing and flat file, quick index, quick lookup, you know, fast decision making right away. So that gets into that. Yeah, their content queries can be. The point is, you can't look at it like a Google query. If you do a Google query, you'll get, you know, you can get millions of returns. And there may be something in there that you want, but you can't really tell. So that's not really a good query. And that was really focusing on basically a series of words or content scanning or indexing that form. Whereas we wanted to be able to look into the data without actually looking at the content. We wanted to save that till the end. All right, we'll look at content at the very end of our selection process. So, next slide, please. Yeah. So we looked at, these are the kind of the requirements, although they rarely state them this way, you know. That's because they have a very difficult time expressing what their real requirements are. Because you have to know what the problem is to do that. Right, that's unfortunate. So, but you can read through these and see that, you know, some of these are pretty straightforward, obvious things, you know. It's not very complicated. Okay, next slide. So this gets into automating analysis is really the underlying theme here. Making a system that's smart enough to be able to figure things out. You know. These slides, by the way, are about 12 years old. No, I'm sorry. They're not 12. They're 8 years old. So, you know, this is not a current problem. I haven't been at NSA for 10 years, and I haven't had a clearance since 2007, so we haven't been working anywhere near any of this stuff since then. So. But the problems haven't changed, as if you read the latest White House Big Data Initiative, they're asking for the same things right here. But they don't say it that way, okay. Next slide. This is, we used this all along. This is right off the web. This was a picture of the web. Someone made this up, I don't know who did it, but this is basically a physical connection, not what we call the logical connection, which is who's communicating across the network. These are the physical fiber optic lines, satellites, wires, things like that, all that communication transits on. But you can see each little dot's maybe 10,000 computers or something, you know. I don't know how many, but it's just a way of visualizing the network. But you can see choke points and things like that. Well, those are where you want to go for all the grasping of all the data. So, next slide. Yeah. Yes, this is my favorite one. They kept saying, you know, volume, velocity, and variety, and this is what they used in Congress to get all the money, is the real problem. We can't handle this anymore. And I said, gee, everything here is positive, you know. Volume, you get more about your target. Velocity, you get it faster. Variety, you get more aspects of this. Is all positive. Why are we saying this is a problem? Well, it was to get money, you know, and do the feeding and continue the process in the circular. You know, I'll retire, come over your way, you hire on to me or something, you know. Next slide. So this is kind of the idea of how you put together an ingest of data. But the process really needs to validate that data in the beginning. And the reason they need to do that is like for customs and border protection. You have tens of thousands of people writing out all these forms worldwide in different, you know, they speak the primary language is different language, not English. And so they're filling out all these forms on data and inputting all the attributes of the companies and the things they want to buy or sell. And then they send these forms in. Well, they don't always spell the names of the companies right, or they might make a visual error on a phone number or the address or something. And so you have to go through a process of validating that data and then correcting it, so that you can then base all follow-on processing on solid data. If you don't do it, if you take in crap, you're going to have garbage in there, and you're building on sand from that point. So then we did event recognition, things we want to really analyze with the data, and then privacy protection. You want to keep you uniquely encrypt things, that any attribute of a U.S. citizen, for example, so no one could follow it from that point on. Remember, this is the initial acquisition of data points. So from that point on, nobody can look at anything but an encrypted version of an attribute of a U.S. citizen. And then you use a distributed storing, and you index the content against that, and you'll see it later when it comes up on the timelining scheme. All this is predicated on the enterprise approach, which says in the end you want to produce intelligence from timelines and graphs and things like that. So what you're doing here has to support that all the way through the enterprise. And that's where you get that, when you bring multidisciplines together, that's where you get that understanding of how one can help the other, and how one breakthrough at one point along the line can support the entire enterprise. And then you get into building the graphs. This is where you take relationships, the ones you want to track, and you do again, this is where we use the B plus tree kind of approach. You index A to B, but you also have to index B to A. So you do a double index, basically, because if you're pulling on B, you want to get A, and if you pull on A, you want to get B. And then you keep a frequency count of how many times you've seen that link and in which direction, and so on. So that kind of thing tells you, that's the building of relationships graph. And actually it builds rather quickly. If you take a few billion inputs, you get a really big spike of the graph, adding links. But after a point, it starts leveling off because you're collecting the same links over and over again. So as you build over time, you've reconstructed most of your social network. So until you add somebody to your social network, the graph does not increase in size. So. And then you go in, look in other domains and other graphs, and then you cross-correlate those domains into a consolidated graph, where now you have, and then you have to have tables of attributes of entities so that you know, and you don't use a person's name. That's the first thing you do not use, like they use to render some people. It's hard to believe that they would do that. They would use a name. It's the most unreliable attribute of a person, is the name. I mean, I do a Google on my name, and I get about 5 or 6 William Edward Binneys in the United States alone. Now, if you start Mohammed somebody, how many of those are you going to get? Well, that's the most unreliable aspect. But they've done that, and it's just insane. So, I mean, the reliable attributes are phone numbers, addresses, passport number, driver's license numbers, things like that. Those are the things you key on, the reliable attributes, and then you start building the graphs with those. Next slide. Yeah. And so this is then, and then you try to consolidate. We had the vision for government here, so that this is how you would consolidate all the graphs from all the government agencies. And this was one we were going to use with Social Security, like who's dead, who's alive, right? Medicare, Medicaid, doctors, hospitals, and labs and things like that. And then do a consolidated graph approach to try to discover, as they request payment, the fraud. And this is what the FBI, in their infinite wisdom, stopped. So we still have it going. At any rate. Next slide. So in automating analysis, this was our automate analysis process. We take high integrity data, that is data that's either stored in bases or live streaming in, and validate it. So you have to validate it to get high integrity, otherwise you're building on sand. So then the next thing is to do some kind of event recognition within that data that may be meaningful in a given environment. Okay, so at that point you may be able to say, you alert, or why don't you go look here? You can get other resources looking at the same problem, saying that something like this might be happening from this. Why don't you go look there and see if you can find something that will support it? And then after that, you go up through events. You get into activity, this is where you build the graph, and you build the communities of the relationships of the entities in the events. And then you look at the community and see how that community is acting, and that gives you an activity. And then at that point, you look and think, well, at this point, we get things like status and disposition of what that community is doing. Okay, and then at that point, then you go up to intentions and capabilities. That's the next level of automation. This is probably the most difficult level. But the point is, you can take past history and look at what they've done in the past and say, here's the criteria, or here's what they did specifically prior to an action that they took, and you can use that criteria in the activity recognition or recognizing certain activity process to do inferencing. Either that or you could postulate conditions. You don't have to be, and a lot of this information is already in the data. You don't have to have knowledge about it to begin with. When you start working with the data, you'll see this knowledge inside that data. The properties are already there. And I'll show you some of that. Next slide, please. Here's how some of it going. This is like, envision this as the graph. And this is how, if you think of the blue as everything else, and the red is what you're really interested in, and the yellow is the zone of proximity that you might, there's a high probability, or there's a high possibility they might be associated with something you're really interested in, so you want to look at them closely. Well, then this then gives you the zone to really focus in, and this is where you'd want to use latent semantic indexing, because you've reduced the problem to such a state that now you're only comparing data of things that are related or in close proximity to a known entity with the data of that entity. You see, now latent semantic indexing would work because you reduced it to the level, so probabilities of combinations go away, and the fact that they're so close, there's a high probability that words in common will actually have the same meaning. Okay. And the rest of it you could think of as the graph that would cover, if you did the world, you could say it would cover New York City and a part of lower state New York, at that scale. But the idea is then, and here's where this new big data initiative starts to come in. They want to have, what they really need is this is my impression of it, they want to have a program go through and automatically figure out new entities that they should consider entities of interest. Okay? They want you to do automatic target development at that level right there. But also they want you to go into the blue mass out there in New York State and New York City and say, what out there should I also be looking at? And is there a way to figure that out too? And there are ways of doing that, but I never told them about that. So, anyhow, also there's a way of looking at communities out there too. And that's what they're asking in this big data initiative. I mean, the Pentagon's going to spend $250 million a year on it. That's only the Pentagon. I mean, they've got all other agencies listed here. They're spending money on it too. But it's all basically the same thing. Analysis is basically analysis. Data is data. I mean, it's not that different from one agency to another. That's why we could take this entire concept and apply it to Medicare, Medicaid fraud. So, next slide. Also with the big data, here's an example of timelining. It doesn't have to be, this is just a way of picturing it. I mean, it could be, you could look at it any way you want. You can reconfigure it, but these are the attributes down the side. And the activity is graphed over a time dimension, which you can vary and add. And then what they want to do is, okay, I want you going down this timeline looking at activities of this community or any other community and saying, here's a set of activities that looks like, or a set of combinations of relationships that are going on that look like there's some activity. And that activity might be terrorism or something like that or anything else, and you need to figure that out. I need an automatic process to help me figure that out. And then I need a process also to automatically assess whether or not we call that a profile. Okay, that's a profile of a community. And is it then a profile of interest? That is, now you're getting into intentions and capabilities. Like, for example, if you're going to smuggle drugs, the guy wanting to buy the drugs has to call the guy to sell it. You know, they got to relate somehow. They have to set up the money transaction. They have to set up transport. All those things have to happen. And they show up in relationships in the community. And so you want to be able to recognize that kind of combination and say, okay, they're going to smuggle drugs from this country to that country, or they're going to smuggle guns from this one to that one. It's the same principle. Right? So that's really what they want. They're not asking those questions, though. But that's really what they need to do. And that's really what they're after. So, and in my mind, this is the real danger, because now, unless the rules are correct, there's a lot of mistakes could be made here by them. And especially when they pull it together, pull these kinds of activities, or this knowledge, by the way, is automatically generated. It's sitting there. So it only pops up if they ask for it. Okay? So if you ask for this timeline, you'll get it. And you could get it on anyone, because the data already exists there. And this is the problem that I see, that is the threat. This is what the Stasi, the KGB, and the Gestapo were after. This was the knowledge of the population. And this is the real danger. Unfortunately, it's also the real way to solve nasty problems and get bad guys. And unfortunately, it is the same in both cases, and there's a threat. And unfortunately, our government is, as Dick Cheney would say, moving to the dark side. At any rate, this is the technology I thought I'd try to pass on to you and see if you enjoyed it anyway. I guess we could take questions now. If you have any questions, I mean, there's a microphone here.
William, it's about 10 after 3, so if you want to run about 15 minutes.
15 minutes of questions? Okay, all right. Okay. Is the mic on? Oh, okay.
Can you hear me? Okay. So, how would a system like this respond to a more and more decentralized and standard-based type of interconnection of everybody?
How would it, decentralized, you mean?
Like as in, you know, mesh networks and...
well, this is already set up, yeah, I think that this is already set up to reconstruct whatever network is there, so it's not a question of a structured network.
How does it get into the kind of direct connections that the nodes are going to have in such a network? How's it going to snoop inside of a network like that?
I'm not quite sure I can answer that for you. Maybe you can tell me a little more about it offline, and I might be able to answer that for you. But like for example, I try to explain the Tor network, but the way they would attack the Tor network is to monitor a large segment of the network and then look at streams of bit streams passing from around the link, and do a time collapse of common bit streams, so that then you could see potentially bit streams moving from one segment to another in time sequence, and even predict the links you're missing and things like that. So that's the way I would envision attacking that. So, and then there's a lot of other things I do after that. Okay. So,
Many, many thanks for an absolutely
All right.
incredible presentation and everything you've done.
Thank you.
In February of 2011, a group of hacktivists associated with Anonymous cracked into intelligence contractor H.B. Gary's servers, and among the things they found were PowerPoint presentations describing how H.B. Gary, along with other intelligence contractors, Palantir, proposed to silence progressive voices like Glenn Greenwald, the Salon.com columnist, critics of the Bank of America, critics of the Chamber of Commerce. Two-point question. First, how does America defend herself against rogue national security contractors? And second, I'm a bank whistleblower, and my telephone and email are being deliberately disrupted and hacked ever since I talked to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So local police won't help you, the FBI won't help you. Where do you go when your telephone and email are being hacked by these people?
You know, well, I figure they got copies of everything I do, right? So, but they're not disrupting my ability to communicate. That's like a little bit different.
Monitoring, I can accept, but the disruption.
Right. That's a little
It's
like
isolation.
they disrupted my life when they sent people with guns at me. In that case, so. but they aren't disrupting my ability. I guess they want to watch what I say, you know. So I keep trying to tell them exactly what I think of them, you know. So. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you to do there.
Well, what about how does America defend herself against these contractors?
See, as I said this to ALA last month. The only thing I could think of that we could start doing is replacing everybody in Congress and getting laws passed that really. I mean, I'm an advocate for term limits. Term limits the only way. I mean. Otherwise, I would, if the police aren't helping you, which they're supposed to do, of course, if somebody, you know, I would go buy some simple things like buy throwaway phones and keep buying them.
That doesn't help people who want to get in touch with you. That's great. It's a very, very different
I understand,
scenario.
but you have to have some way to tell them. Right, right. I said the most secure way is to buy two phones, give one to your friend, you take one, and then you'll use it. You'll show up as a graph, as a link, isolated link, and you'll not be connected anywhere. So.
Yes, but if you're counting on people to get in touch with you.
Yes. No, I understand the problem, but I just don't know what to tell you.
Hello. This is actually a bit tangential, but when you were talking about some of the ways you'd have to look at the data and some of the problems you had, you were talking about how Google-type search terms wouldn't work because of inaccuracies, because of ways things get spelled differently. Could you use some of the techniques you developed to create a more efficient way of searching just the open web?
Yes. In fact, we approached Google for doing that. But they said, no, we do really well ourselves. So okay.
Interesting. Thank you.
Well, actually, we approached Google in 2003.
Hi, there was a big New Yorker article a few months ago about this, and I wondered, besides coming to your talk today, what is there in the public space that we could use to follow up technically on, you know, how to apply this kind of analysis in all sorts of data problems?
See, a lot of companies, when they get this, they keep these things as intellectual capital and don't share it, and that's true also of the government. So a lot of times they won't tell you these kinds of things. Like I never documented how to do anything because I didn't want the government to know it. So I would put out what to do. This is what to do here, you know. So they could easily, but it's very. I guess the companies feel that they lose, or I guess university is the only free-flowing place to get knowledge like that. I mean, they tend to say you have to share, you know, whereas government and companies don't. So I'm not quite sure what to tell you where to look there. So I mean, I go around the web looking all the time, just with technical terms, just to see, and then look at it. Most of it's advertising, you know. And nothing really technical, so they're trying to keep their secrets of whatever they're doing to themselves, the specifics of it anyway.
I Googled thin thread, and I found a paper from MITRE that had nothing to do with it.
Right, that's right. That's the other, see, that's the other problem, right? With the word doesn't necessarily, you have to do a combination of things like NSA, thin thread, you know. Actually, you still won't find much there, too. So, you will find the redacted DODIG report, which is like 97% redacted. The only thing they left in was the DODIG's assessment of thin thread. It said it doesn't really have enough documentation for the operators. Well, see, the problem that I thought that was pretty funny myself, because they really didn't quite understand what they were looking at, because that was a fully automated, remotely controlled system that had 0 operators on the front end. The only thing we provided was a hardware diagram, so if hardware broke or wore out, they could replace it. So I thought that was funny. But they left all that kind of stuff in there, in that report, if you look at it. Yeah.
Thank you for a great talk.
Thank
I'm
you.
wondering how you would classify your security status at this moment, for one thing.
Well, my security, I don't really care, okay?
So then I guess my next question is, what prevents this from breaking into the public sphere more? Like, obviously you haven't been entirely censored. You're here speaking. I've seen you on Democracy Now! But
right.
what stops there from being a press conference with you and other people who you mentioned who are sympathetic?
Nothing. And in fact, I volunteer for all of them.
Right, so, but I mean, I don't mean technically what stops it. Socially, what have you? How come this?
Socially, I give you my impression of it. Socially, I think there's a lot of press that is afraid of this issue. National security is kind of a taboo issue for them. They can't discuss it. When in fact, to my mind, that's the most important thing we need to discuss right now, or one of them anyway.
That's basically it.
Yeah.
I have two questions. One is related to what the woman said about, you know, securing her own communication. You said, well,
Yeah.
I'll get some disposable phones. But in the day of mass information, what's to stop Staples, who sells the track phone, which is called, from watching
Yeah.
you as you go out?
Yeah.
See, even if you pay with cash.
Yeah.
You ever see, you know, taking a picture, you got photo ID. How is any of that really secure? That was a question that came up just when she asked. But
Well, I mean, the point is you don't have to give them your name when you buy the phone.
right, but what
So-
I'm saying is that with information aggregate, you know, I've heard of like face recognition stuff that's going on with Facebook now, everything.
Okay, but see, you have to hide within the crowd, right? What's the random probability of the match, or actually having, I mean, they could have a picture of you, but so what?
Right.
Unless they can match you to a name and a place and who you are and what you're doing.
Right.
I mean, that's still private then.
Okay. Well, two more questions. One just very short. To what degree do you think, I wasn't sure if you answered this before, the Tor browser is secure for just...
Well, all I did was give my approach of attacking it, how I would attack it. Okay.
I see.
Actually, I think it creates work. I mean, it's somebody would have to put in the work to figure it out. So, actually, that's not a bad point. The point is, to disrupt this kind of activity is making work for them, especially by the people, causes them a lot of problems. Okay. So, in other words, it does. It causes them a lot of problems. The people have to work that out. I mean, if a machine can work it out, if you have a cipher and a machine can break the code, that's not a lot of work for them. But if you, as I've said to a couple other people, if you start using codes, right, you substitute nouns for nouns, verbs for verbs, and so on. So the constructor of the words that you would put together would read like anything else and be logical, right, position-wise, but it wouldn't have the meaning that they were reading. Okay, so they'd be reading this. So what does that mean? A person then has to look at it, and now they've got to take time out So if a lot of people started doing that, you know, that would surely make a lot of work for them. So one of the other things I think I was mentioning, I came up with Jacob Applebaum on the Tor project. One of the questions was, where are all these other sites in the network? I suggested, I didn't know if I said it to Jacob or not, but I was suggesting one of the things you could do is, if you're distributed around the country, is just do trace routes on all the things that you're sending to one another. Then lay the links out that go across the trace, and overlap them as like a multi-dimensional scaling approach on all the linking. Then that should reconstruct the inside the United States, the network. And then you could look at that as a scaling issue and try to lay it on a map of the United States. See? And then that would give you the lines inside the United States. Then you look at the intersecting points and say, here are the converging points of a lot of lines, and so therefore that's a high probability site to tap. Okay, so that, and by the way, I did for the IFF, I did some numbering scheme. I didn't tell them this, but I didn't sign it in my affidavit, but so it's not there. But I did some further calculations on the storage site in Utah at Buffdale. If you looked at 100,000 square feet there of storage space, that's of the 1,000,000 square feet, that's 100,000 square foot is going to be storage. If you looked at that and said, okay, with today's technology, like cleversafe.com has it, I think they sell a 10 exabyte storage capacity that will occupy 21 racks in like 200 square feet. So at 10 exabytes for every 200 square feet, 100,000 feet gives you 5,000 exabytes or 5 zettabytes, okay? Now, I did some calculations at 10 gigabits a second off the nearest device production. What would it take, how many nearest devices would it take to maintain 100 of the last 100 years of data online, or the latest 100, however you want to look at it? How many nearest devices would it take to sustain that storage? And it turns out full processing would take about 1,250 nearest devices running full processing all the time to sustain 100 years of data on that system. So, but the nearest doesn't, I mean, none of the networks work that way, so it's probably somewhere between almost up to twice that number that they would need to do that. So, but that's with, even with today's storage capacity. I mean, so down the road, it's only going to get much higher, so.
Okay, last question is, to what degree do you think there are people involved in higher levels of NSA or the CIA, whatever, that are sympathetic to the average person's cause of privacy? And to what degree do you think we are moving towards the dark side, where these people are kind of consumed themselves, or, you know?
Legends in their own minds, that's what I refer to. Right. Yeah, the arrogance is, the higher you go, the higher the arrogance, level of arrogance. I don't know how else to put it.
Right.
Yeah, all right.
Thanks. Great talk.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for all you've done. It's funny, I have that sense of surveillance in my life, and I often think I don't mind them hearing me if I thought they would listen to me.
Reception is a different issue, yeah. Right.
Comprehension.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And
you had talked about like the solution to this problem being vote the bastards out, which, you know, we're living in the most gerrymandered representative democracy in the world. Obviously, I think there's just no two ways about the fact that that's not going to work.
Okay.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
So you're talking about being on that verge of totalitarianism. So we're stuck between an impossible electoral situation and what you think is the verge of totalitarianism. What in your mind flips over that verge, and what does that look like? What is life like after all this infrastructure is put to the point of control?
I don't know about you, but it looks like to me East Germany or the Weimar Republic. Just before, I mean, I think that we're in that state now where, you know, if some people don't start, because they didn't speak up in the Weimar Republic, look what they got. So, I mean, it was a little probably before your time, but that was when Hitler came to rise in Germany. So, And because nobody spoke up, nobody opposed it, that happened.
Now, we're in an environment where I think one of the great lessons, media lessons of the Bush administration is that if everyone speaks up and you just ignore them, nothing happens. And so I'm personally, I'm in the media. I'm like, I would like it if telling stories changed things, but I'm not sure right now that it does.
Actually, the influence does occur when large numbers of people do call into representatives, House and Senate, and you can put pressure on that way. The White House can maybe ignore you, but the House and Senate, they're a lot closer, and they have a higher fear factor, fear of being voted out. I believe in limits. I mean, that way they don't become sedimentary kind of people there that are perpetually there, and they tend to begin to think that their vision of what should happen is obviously the right one. In other words, they corrupt their own minds after a while.
So essentially, you're saying that the best bet of avoiding totalitarianism is probably a WikiLeaks blackout.
A
Wikipedia blackout.
I think exposing anything in any way you can expose it is the best way. Yeah. Right.
You started by pointing out that the national intelligence agencies weren't providing operational intelligence to the operators or anything, and then expanded to the programs that expanded beyond any sort of constitutional controls and any reasonable limits on what they do. Are those related in some way? Would devolving power from national agencies down to these services or to smaller entities be able to provide?
I think the theme there is sharing, and the sharing is the issue. They have a problem sharing knowledge and also sharing information and making things known to the public or anybody. Sharing is I think the common problem crossing that.
Both internally
issue.
and externally.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Did you get that? Hello? Check, check.